It was a stolen glove that started everything. Not stolen by a thief, stolen by winter, the way Manitoba winter steals things without apology. One glove had blown off the hand of a boy named Theo Aldridge during a February storm, and because he had only that one pair, he'd been wearing a mismatched replacement, one gray wool, one thin knit, when he found the envelope. He found it wedged beneath the wheel of a dumpster behind the Portage Avenue Mall, half soaked through from the morning slush, the corner still stiff enough to hold its shape. Theo almost didn't pick it up. He'd learned that most things behind dumpsters were better left alone, but something made him crouch down and look, and when he did, he saw the edge of paper, clean white paper, the kind his school used for report cards, and a corner of burgundy, the deep wine red of something official. He tucked it under his arm and kept walking. He had 2 hours before his mother's dialysis appointment ended. 2 hours to collect bottles along the strip between Portage and Notre Dame, cash them in at the depot, and be back at Health Sciences Center before the nurses started to look for him. He was 11 years old, and he had been managing this schedule for 7 months. Theo's mother, Ruth, had been sick for most of his life in the way that some people are sick, not dramatically, not with sudden crisis, but slowly, the way a house settles. She'd worked shifts at a packaging plant until her kidneys started failing at 41. After that, there was the waiting list, the dialysis 3 times a week, the forms and the phone calls, and the special diet that cost more than regular food. Theo's Aunt Paulette came when she could, which wasn't often enough. So Theo came instead. He didn't tell his teachers. He told them he had a standing orthodontist appointment on Tuesday mornings. He didn't have braces. He cashed in 14 bottles at the depot on Ellis, 1.68 cents, and then sat on the low concrete wall outside and opened the envelope. There was money inside, not a little money. The bills were bound with a paper strap, the kind banks use. There were more of them too, not just the one bundle but 4, all banded together, all 50s and 100s, the numbers printed neat and clean. Theo counted slowly, his lips moving. His hands were shaking by the time he reached the 3rd bundle, and not from the cold. $44,000. He sat very still for a long moment, watching a pigeon walk in a slow circle near the depot door. His breath made small clouds. Somewhere behind him, a bus groaned to a stop. $44,000 would pay for his mother's medications for the next 4 years. It would pay the rent on their apartment on Sargent Avenue through summer. It would buy a winter coat that actually zipped. It would mean he didn't have to collect bottles anymore, didn't have to stand in the cold counting change, didn't have to lie about the orthodontist. He put the money back in the envelope. He wasn't sure why he did it. He just knew that it wasn't his, and that he could feel that clearly, the way you can feel when you're wearing someone else's shoes. They fit mostly, but the shape is wrong. He tucked the envelope inside his jacket, against his chest, and walked to the bus stop. The man who had lost the envelope was named Gordon Ashford, and he was, by most definitions that mattered in Winnipeg, important. He ran Ashford Property Holdings from a glass and steel building on Main Street. Commercial real estate, industrial leases, a portfolio of apartment buildings that stretched from the North End to Transcona. He was 58 years old, divorced twice, with a daughter he saw at Christmas, and a son he'd stopped speaking to 3 years ago after a disagreement that had started as a legal dispute and become something else entirely. Gordon was not a warm man. He knew this. His first wife had told him, and his second wife had confirmed it, and his administrative assistant of 12 years, a careful woman named Lorraine, had implied it more diplomatically on the occasion of his 55th birthday, when she'd given him a card that said, "To a truly professional leader," rather than anything affectionate. But Gordon had principles. That was what he told himself, and what he mostly believed. He paid his taxes. He paid his contractors on time. When a tenant in one of his buildings died without family, he arranged for the belongings to be properly stored rather than discarded. The $44,000 was cash he'd withdrawn from his personal account to pay a man named Jerry Tilson, who was a private investigator, and who had spent 6 weeks locating something Gordon needed to find. Gordon didn't use personal checks for this kind of thing. He didn't explain to himself why. He just didn't. He'd taken the envelope from his car to the mall because he was meeting Tilson at the food court, which he understood was an unusual location, but which Tilson had insisted upon. He'd set the envelope on the seat while he pulled on his coat in the parking garage. and then he'd forgotten it, which he only realized when he was standing in front of a pretzel stand with Tilson looking at him expectantly. Gordon had gone back to the garage immediately. The envelope was gone. He'd stood beside his car for 3 minutes, perfectly still, doing the calculation. Reporting it to the police would require explaining what it was for, which would require explaining Tilson, which would require explaining why he'd hired a private investigator, which would require explaining everything that came before that. The will, his brother's estate, the document he suspected had been altered. He did not call the police. He drove back to his office and sat at his desk and looked at the city through his floor-to-ceiling window and felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely afraid. Theo rode the bus to Health Sciences and sat outside the dialysis unit on a plastic chair and held the envelope in his lap and thought. He'd looked inside again on the bus. He hadn't been able to stop himself. He'd counted more carefully the second time, not 44,000 but 46,200. He'd miscounted the first time because his hands were still shaking. Inside the envelope, beneath the money, was a business card. It was thick stock, cream-colored, with embossed letters, Gordon Asford, Asford Property Holdings, and an address on Main Street and a phone number. Theo turned the card over. The back was blank. He put it in his jacket pocket separately from the envelope. When his mother came out of the unit, she looked the way she always looked after dialysis, wrung out, a little gray, careful with her steps as though the floor might tip. But she smiled when she saw him. She always smiled when she saw him. "How many today?" she asked, settling into her chair while they waited for the transit bus. 14. Good haul. Mom, he said, and then stopped. She looked at him sideways. Ruth had a way of reading him that she'd developed over 11 years of paying close attention, the way mothers do when they can't afford to miss things. "What happened?" "Nothing bad," he said quickly. I found something. I'm still figuring out what to do about it." She waited. She was good at waiting. "I'll tell you tonight," he said. She nodded. She trusted him, which was its own kind of wait. Gordon spent the afternoon making calls that didn't go anywhere. He asked the mall's customer service desk if anyone had turned in a found envelope. He was told no. He called Tilson and asked if anyone had been watching them in the parking garage. Tilson said he didn't know but would check. Gordon sat with the silence of his office and understood, gradually, that the money was gone. What he couldn't stop thinking about was the document. Tilson had found it, or found where it likely was, which was almost but not quite the same thing. He'd traced it to a safety deposit box in Thunder Bay, registered to Gordon's brother's former law firm. The firm had dissolved, but the box had never been officially closed. Tilson believed the box held a copy of their father's original will. Not the amended version that had been filed with the estate, but the first draft, the one Gordon suspected had been altered after their father's dementia, had made him easy to manipulate. The money was to pay Tilson for his 6 weeks of work, and for the travel to Thunder Bay to retrieve whatever was in the box. Without the payment, Tilson wouldn't go. That was the arrangement. Gordon was not a man who had many people to call when things went wrong. He knew this about himself without feeling too badly about it. He dialed his daughter's number at 7 in the evening, not to ask for help, but because she was the one person who called him without an agenda. Her name was Simone, and she was 32, and she worked as a physiotherapist in Saskatoon, and she was, in Gordon's private estimation, the best thing he'd managed to do. "Dad," she said when she answered, and he could hear the honest warmth in it, the uncomplicated gladness, and it undid something in him that he hadn't known was knotted. "I lost something," he said. "I'm handling it. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause, the kind Simone made when she was setting down whatever she'd been doing to give him her full attention. "Tell me," she said. Theo told his mother everything that night. He sat at their kitchen table with the envelope open between them, the money stacked in neat piles. He'd organized it while she was resting, and the business card set at the top like a label. Ruth sat across from him in her housecoat with a cup of weak tea and looked at it all for a long time without speaking. "How much?" she finally said. $46,200. She exhaled slowly. She looked at the money the way people look at something they want very much and have decided not to touch. "Theo," she said, "I know. That's not ours." "I know, Mom." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her hands were always slightly cool now, something to do with circulation. "I'm proud of you for not just walking away with it." "I thought about it," he said honestly. Of course you did. So did I, sitting here looking at it. She squeezed his hand. But thinking about something isn't the same as doing it. You know who it belongs to. He pushed the card toward her. She looked at it for a long moment. Gordon Ashford, she read. Her expression shifted in a way Theo couldn't read. Do you know who he is? I know his buildings, she said. He owns a lot of property in the North End. She set the card back down. He's not a small person, Theo. He has resources. Which means there's no reason this can't be returned quietly and safely. What if he doesn't? What if he's the kind of person who doesn't say thank you? Ruth smiled, and it was the real one, the one that made her look like herself. Then we say thank you to ourselves. Privately. And we sleep. Theo called the number on the card the next morning from the school office, telling the secretary he needed to make a personal call. He'd practiced what to say. He kept it short. Mr. Ashford's office, said a woman's voice. I need to speak with Mr. Ashford. I found something that belongs to him. It's important. A pause. Can I take your name? Theo Kendall. Another pause, longer. Can you hold? He held for 4 minutes, which was a long time for a school office call, but the secretary who'd let him use the phone was watching him with an expression of careful neutrality, and he kept his own face still. This is Gordon Ashford. The voice was lower than Theo had expected. Controlled, not unkind, but with no warmth built into it yet. The voice of someone who'd learned to hold things back. Mr. Ashford, my name is Theo. I'm 11. I found an envelope yesterday behind the Portage Avenue Mall. There's a business card inside with your name. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Theo checked to see if the call had dropped. Are you still there? Theo asked. I'm here. Another pause. Is the envelope? Is the contents intact? Yes, sir. All of it. This time the silence was different. Softer. Theo, Gordon said, and his voice had changed. Something had come loose in it. Where are you right now? They met that afternoon at the library on Millennium Drive. Ruth's suggestion, because it was public and neutral, and neither intimidating nor informal. Ruth came with Theo, moving carefully, one hand on his shoulder. She wore her good coat, the one she saved for the clinic. Gordon was already there when they arrived, standing near the periodical section with his hands in his coat pockets. He was taller than Theo had imagined, a large man going thin at the temples, with the kind of face that held its expression firmly in place, as though it had learned to do so a long time ago. He looked at Theo first, then at Ruth, then back at Theo. Theo held out the envelope. Gordon took it. He didn't open it immediately. He just held it, both hands, and looked at the boy standing in front of him. This small, serious boy in a mismatched pair of gloves and a jacket with a broken zipper, who had found $46,000 in an alley and brought it back. You didn't count it, Gordon said. It wasn't quite a question. I did count it, Theo said. 46,200. I was going to tell you if it was different when you checked. Gordon's jaw moved. He looked at Ruth. He's yours? He is, she said. Simply, like a fact. Gordon looked at Theo again for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, Why? Theo thought about it. He'd thought about little else since yesterday. Because it wasn't mine, he said. And because I knew you were looking for it, even if I didn't know you yet. Gordon stood very still. Then he put the envelope in his coat pocket and extended his hand to Theo, and they shook, the man's large hand around the boy's small one, and something passed between them that neither of them had words for yet. Gordon called his daughter Simone that evening and told her what had happened. He told her in the way he told her things, which was factually and in order, but she heard what was underneath. A child found it, she said, 11 years old. Came to the library with his mother. She's on dialysis. He collects bottles after school to help with her expenses. Gordon paused. He counted the money to make sure he was returning the right amount. Simone was quiet for a moment. Dad, what are you going to do? I'm working on it, he said. And he was. The private investigator's name wasn't relevant to what happened next. What was relevant was that Gordon paid him, not from the recovered cash, but from his own account properly with a wire transfer, and Tilson went to Thunder Bay, and what he found in the safety deposit box was exactly what Gordon had suspected. His father's original will. Undated revisions in a handwriting that wasn't his father's. A notarized signature on the amendment that was witnessed by a man who had died 3 months before the signature's date. The law firm that had filed the amended will had been dissolved, but 3 of its partners were still practicing in Winnipeg. Gordon took the documents to a estate's litigation lawyer he trusted, a woman named Paulette something, steady and precise, and the process that followed was slow and unglamorous and legal, the way most justice is. His brother contested. Gordon expected that. The contest lasted 8 months. He won. The original will was probated. The estate, which included property their father had always intended to be split equally, was redistributed. Gordon's sister, whom he hadn't spoken to properly in 6 years because the fracture had spread, called him when it was over. She said, "I didn't think you'd actually do it." He said, "I almost didn't." She said, "What changed?" He thought about a boy in a library in February, holding out an envelope with both hands. He said, "Something happened that reminded me what doing the right thing looks like." She didn't ask him to elaborate. She just said, "Come for Easter." He said he would. He'd gone back to find Ruth and Theo 3 weeks after the library meeting. He hadn't told them he was coming. He was afraid they'd find a reason to refuse, and he had something specific in mind. He sat across from Ruth at the same kitchen table where she and Theo had counted the money, and he told her what he wanted to do. Not charity, he was specific about that, and she would have refused charity. He could see it clearly in how she held herself. An arrangement. A fair one. He owned a property on Wellington Crescent that had been his parents' house, which he'd been renting to a series of tenants for 20 years. The current tenants were moving out in April. The house needed work, real work, not cosmetic, and he wanted someone to live there while the renovation was managed, someone responsible to keep an eye on contractors. He would cover the utilities. He would ask for a nominal rent. He told her the number. Ruth looked at him steadily. "Why us?" "Because your son showed me something," Gordon said. "And I'd like to know him better, if you're both willing." She looked at Theo. Theo looked at Gordon. "Your pipes probably need replacing," Theo said seriously. "The older houses on Wellington all need the pipes replaced." Gordon blinked. And then, for the first time in what felt like years, he laughed. A real laugh, the startled kind that came from somewhere genuine. "You're probably right," he said. "Ruth got a transplant in June of the following year. She'd been on the list for 4 years. When the call came, she was in the garden of the Wellington house, deadheading the roses that had survived the winter, and Theo was sitting on the back step eating toast and listening to her hum, something he didn't recognize. The hospital was 40 minutes away. Gordon drove them. He'd been over for dinner the week before and happened to still have his number in Ruth's phone under GA, which was not exactly a close friendship but was not nothing either. He waited in the family room while Theo sat in the chair closest to the surgery doors and looked at his hands. The operation went well. The surgeon came out after 3 hours and said the words people wait to hear, and Theo put his face in his hands and made a sound he hadn't made since he was very small, the kind that comes before crying and is its own thing entirely. Gordon sat down next to him and put a hand on his shoulder. And they stayed like that for a while, neither of them speaking, in the way of people who have learned something true about each other and don't need to name it. Ruth recovered, slowly, carefully, the way she had always done things. By August, she was in the garden without having to stop and rest. By September, she was considering going back to work, not at the plant, but somewhere less demanding, somewhere that wouldn't cost her what she'd already given. Theo started grade 7 at a school closer to Wellington, a school where he didn't have to lie about orthodontist appointments. He joined the geography club, which met on Tuesdays, because he had Tuesdays free now. He still collected bottles sometimes, not because he needed to, but because he was good at it, and because there was a satisfaction in finding value in what other people had thrown away. He'd always understood, without being able to say it, that the worth of a thing and what someone decided to do with it were 2 entirely different matters. Gordon came to the school's end-of-year assembly in June. He sat in the back because he hadn't been invited exactly, but Theo had mentioned it the week before, while they were replacing the washers in the laundry room faucet. Theo had insisted on learning how, and Gordon had taught him, and Gordon had thought that sounded like the sort of thing he might go to. He sat in the back row of folding chairs with his coat on his lap, and watched a boy he hadn't known a year ago walk across a gymnasium stage to accept a certificate for academic improvement. And the boy looked into the audience the way kids do, searching, and when he found the face he was looking for, he gave a small nod, private, certain, the kind of acknowledgement between people who have established something real. Gordon nodded back. Outside afterward, in the parking lot, with the June sun finding the last ice patches to finish off, Theo came to stand beside him while Ruth talked to a teacher near the door. "What was the certificate for?" Gordon asked. "Geography," Theo said. "I got the highest mark in the city on the regional assessment." Gordon looked at him. "The whole city, the whole province actually." They said city, but they meant province. Gordon looked away at the parking lot, at the ordinary grey afternoon, at the rows of cars in the sun. "Theo," he said. "Yeah, I'm glad you picked up that envelope." Theo was quiet for a moment. "Me too," he said. "Most days." Gordon laughed, the startled real laugh that Theo had first pulled out of him at the kitchen table, and Theo grinned. And Ruth finished her conversation and came toward them across the lot, walking steadily now, no longer careful with the floor. She had her good coat on. She was smiling before she reached them.